And we are going to be continuing off in the Joshua and Judges period, hopefully finishing it today. Now, last time we talked about Jericho. And Jericho is one of the unique places because there's so much that the Bible tells us. We have a number of details about this event. You can see there, that's actually pretty detailed. The rest of the Joshua Judges period occurs over about 300, 350 some years. And we don't really have a lot of details about specific events. We have broad brushstrokes for the rest of the Joshua Judges period. And so for the rest of this, and potentially a little bit of the next, we're going to be going over things just trying to match with what we know about them. We might find some new information, but we're not going to be able to go into as much detail simply because the Bible doesn't give us that detail. So I just want you to be aware that even though I'm not going in this detail, it's not because it doesn't match up, it's because there's nothing to match to. But the next city we're going to be talking about is the city of Ai. Turn my monitor on, I always forget to do that. So the city of Ai was the next one they conquered. Joshua 8, 1 and 2. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid or discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai. See, I have delivered it into your hand, the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. And you shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king, except that you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. Set up an ambush behind the city." Now, for some time, they thought that this was a place called Et Tel, over here. You can see the name Et Tel there, and it's pointing down here, this little area on the map. And that's because they didn't really have any other good place for Ai. Unfortunately, this spot doesn't really have a good match archaeologically. Now, this led many to say that the Bible was wrong, because W.F. Albright here assumed this must be Ai as there was no other option. So he said this was Ai, not anything there that really matched well, and so it led people to discourage the Bible. Now, this is just another warning about trying to match things to the Bible when we don't have all the data, so we need to be very careful about that. And so now our best assumption is this city here, Makadar. Now, this is not a perfect match, but is the best match that we have to date. So what are the biblical requirements of the city of Ai? Well, we know that there is an ambush site on the east side. There's a shallow valley on the north side. And Joshua seems to have his main force on a visible display. And so there is a hill on this north side as well. In fact, this is the highest hill in the region. So it had been a great position to hold, as well as a very key place to be seen. And so here is Khirbet el Makadar. Here is the ambush valley. And so we need evidence of a fortification at the time of Joshua. The time of Joshua is about 1400 BC, give or take a few years to a decade or so. And we're looking for a place that has some sort of fortification. Joshua 8:29 indicates that there was a city gate. And Khirbet el Makadar is the best place for all these. You can see here an aerial view. Now, Khirbet el Makadar is here. Et Tel is here. Very close. So you can see why they thought this was a match for Ai, because the terrain is virtually identical. You still have the valley to the north, the east. This is the north. Yeah, sorry. Got confused there for a second. So you have this small valley to the north, the hill, and then the large ambush site. Now, both of those fit. So let's see if Khirbet el Makadar is a better fit archaeologically. Well, they did find a very good fortification here. They found a horseshoe pattern of one of the chambers of the gate with the stones. Now, unfortunately, they did not find the stones where they should be, because a lot of the time what happened is after some place was built, it was abandoned, people would then cannibalize that structure. So a lot of the time, and you'll see this later, these stones that are found are actually found in a new structure. So you'll see a stone that is in a wall or in a house or something like that that was previously used in another building and has some identifying marks to match that. And so we see here a gate stone that was used in a later building. So you know it's from this area because you wouldn't cannibalize a structure very far away, and then they would dig for other evidences, and they did find some. Now, here is what it may have looked like in the past, the time of Joshua, potentially. We did find evidence of a very large wall, about 4 meters wide, that's about 13 feet, give or take, and about 3 times as high. This is the largest one found in Israel. It may have been like a north border outpost for these people, and you can see the picture here. This wall is not what we're talking about. That's a modern wall. This is the foundation of the wall that we're talking about. Now, there's a lot that we don't know about this because the area is blocked off. You can see here, this is an archaeological zone, and they cannot dig there. They dug a little bit, and then they were removed, basically. So what they found is they found some evidence of a tower, and a lot of the times these cities were mirror images. So one side would be the same as the others. It would be symmetrical. So they're expecting to have another tower on this side, as same as this side. But we can't dig there. That being said, we got a lot of area that we can dig in, or I should say they can dig in, and they found a decent amount of evidence. For one, they found fire. That's what we're looking for, because Joshua burned this place down. But unfortunately, a lot of the evidence is removed. Again, people came back, they dug it out, and rebuilt. The only place that we have this evidence still is evidence that was protected. So we see in these areas evidence of a fire about 4 inches thick. 4 inches thick, so it's a decent amount of fire. Not as bad, not as big as Jericho, but still a very bad fire. We also see that there were men and women here. So this was a fortress. We have the walls, we have the foundations. But we also have women here because we have evidence of neonatal births. The Canaanite people, what they would do if they had an infant that died is they would put it in a jar and bury it under the house. And they have found records of this. So there were men and women here just as Joshua, just as the Bible says there was. We have the pottery of this time period. Now, what is very unique about this pottery is that it was found too hard. Basically, it was refried. So normally they would cook their pottery until it got to a certain hardness and then use that and be fine. But the pottery that they found here from the time of Joshua shows evidence that it was cooked to over 800 degrees Celsius, meaning that it was blazed hotter than what they have. And so it means that there was fire here. So even though we don't have ash from everywhere, we have evidence of a very hot fire, a very encompassing fire because of all of this refried pottery. And the pottery type also shows that it was from a fortress. This wasn't the same pottery that you'd expect to find in a house, in a living condition. This was large storage jars. We also have some sling stones as well as scarabs. Now we have an Amenhotep II scarab. This is, remember, is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, as well as some Hyksos period scarabs. You can see a Hyksos one here, as well as the one of Amenhotep II. Now, the one thing that does not match well with the Bible, it still could, because the Bible says that, so Joshua burned Ai and made it a permanent heap of ruins, a desolation to this day. Meaning that when Joshua, the book, was penned, this place was a desolation. Yet there is evidence that people soon came back in the period of the Judges, so within a few hundred years, and built a settlement here. Not a fortress, but a settlement. So it could mean one of a few things. Either this is not Ai, that what the Bible is speaking of is the fortress itself, not that a settlement was not here, or they came in after the book of Joshua was penned. Now, we don't know. We still haven't dug a lot here, or I should say they haven't dug a lot. I keep saying we like I'm doing this. But there's a lot more information they can get. A lot of these sites that we're going to be going over, they've dug there for a few years. Some of these places, though, will need 600 years to dig out completely. They obviously haven't done that. And so if you're interested in this, if this is something that thrills you, keep your ear to the grindstone, or ear to the ground, nose to the grindstone. And you'll probably find more information year after year, because some of these discoveries we're going to go over tonight came out literally within the last few years. So overall, Joshua has went from across the Jordan, Gilgal, Jericho, Ai. Now, what did he do next? He renewed the covenant. So Joshua 8:33, they basically went, and half of them were on Mount Gerizim and half on Mount Ebal, and they renewed the covenant there, the blessings and the curses. Now this is by the city Shechem. Now this is a city that is mentioned very frequently in the Torah. And Genesis 12:6 is the first mention, and Abram and Jacob both have some strong dealings with these people. Now, what's unique about this place, or pretty unique, is that we don't hear of a battle here in the Bible. We don't know how they came in and what happened with the people that were living here. Did they leave peacefully? Were they accepted in? Were they fleeing in terror and already gone? We don't know. Archaeologically, it doesn't really tell us much else. So this is a mystery. Hopefully, as we dig up the site, we'll get more information. But this is a question that neither archaeology or the Bible really gives us much information about. But we do know that while here, that half the tribes got on the mountain here, and the other half on the mountain here. So Mount Gerizim, Mount Ebal, Shechem. And they renew their covenant. Now, a covenant, in general, requires a greater and lesser party, blessings and curses, and witnesses. So 6 tribes on the left, 6 tribes on the right, and the Ark of the Covenant in the middle. Moses was told to do this, and Joshua fulfilled this. Now, you wouldn't expect there would be much evidence of this. Yet, we hear that Joshua built an altar. He built an altar on Mount Ebal, the Mount of Curses. And in 1980, they found this altar here. You can see this very large altar structure. But it doesn't date to the time of Joshua. This is about the 1200s BC, a few hundred years afterwards. So not likely Joshua's altar. But underneath it, they found another altar. See that little one there? It was buried underneath the larger altar. In the smaller altar, it dates to about the time of Joshua, 1400s. Has a Tutmosis III scarab, some late Bronze Age pottery. Now, unfortunately, that scarab is missing. That does happen from time to time. Archaeologically, a piece goes missing, and we just have the record of the people that discovered it. We also have a pumice chalice. And why we would make a chalice out of pumice, I do not know, but they did. And this is very similar to chalices that have been found at Avaris, Tel El Daba today. That is the city that Israel seems to have left Egypt from. So it makes sense that we would find pottery objects from that place, since they did basically ransack it. They asked for it, so I don't know if you can call it ransacking, but still. So we're finding all this with that little altar in there. Now, that little altar was buried in a very ceremonial way. When they had a sacred site that they wanted to preserve but did not want to use anymore, they would ceremonially bury it. And so that's what they did. And then they built this larger altar. And both of these are in accordance with the biblical requirements of building an altar that was not in use by a Levite. Now, in the smaller altar, they found a defixio. That is a cursed tablet. And you can see a picture of it there. Now, a cursed tablet is something that you would write a curse on, fold it up, and put it in the ground. Either bury it, put it in a well, somehow get it under the ground. And when you folded this up, the curse would take effect. Now, they tried to unfold this, because this is a little piece of lead. It doesn't look like lead, but it's lead. It's dirty lead. And they tried to unfold it, they couldn't, and it broke off. So they stopped doing that, but they had a sample. They sent that off, and it actually showed that it was from a mine in Greece. And this mine stopped in the 1200s. So again, it matches the time period of the smaller altar. And it's very unique or very interesting that we find a cursed tablet on the Mountain of Curses inside an Israelite altar. Well, they did some thermographic imaging, and inside they have the proto-alphabetic script of Sinai, the script that we talked about, I believe it was last time. You can see the letters there. So this is the script that Moses would have been using, that the Canaanites were using. This is the script that came out of those Egyptian hieroglyphics. Now, the message can be read a few different ways. Left, right, up, down, right, left. But it is certain that we have both the name El and Yahweh being used together. That it doesn't sound remarkable because we have that in our Bible, but it's very remarkable archaeologically. Remember from a time or two ago that I told you about that documentary hypothesis that the Torah is just a conglomeration of different manuscripts that were put together in the exile? Because one used the word El for God, one used the word Yahweh for God. This blows that to pieces. We have the same person, the same object, having both the name El and Yahweh for God. That is remarkable archaeologically and blows a lot of this, as far as documentary hypothesis, out of the water. It shows that the word El and the word Yahweh are both used for God, just describing different characteristics of God. And that's why we have Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 using different words for God. Now, the epigraphers, they had two different epigraphers look at this language, look at this writing. And while there are some letters that are not perfectly clear, it doesn't really change them reading. The other letters, the other words, are concrete. They've been used so many times, and there's not really that many of them in this, but we know exactly what this says. You are cursed by the God Yahweh. Cursed, you will die. Cursed, cursed, you will surely die. Cursed you are by Yahweh, cursed. So that's what this says. It's short and to the point, isn't it? This may not seem like much, but this shows that there were people using this language, using the words El and Yahweh for God on a place where the Bible says they were using curses. The people were shouting curses, where we have a record of an altar being built, all matching the time period. This is purely remarkable archaeologically, and this came out, or was discovered just before COVID, was delayed because of that, and came out in the last year or two. So we may find a lot more information, because that altar, they only dug up half of it. That little altar, we only got about halfway through. Then time ran out, so they had to bury everything back up. So maybe in the next year or two, we're going to find some more just crazy monumental discoveries in this little altar. But we did find a few other things. We found some scarabs, Tutmosis III, Ramses II, or a 15th century scarab. It's uncertain on that one. But all the bones are kosher animals, again, pointing to the Israelites being in this area. Uncut stones. And so this is going to be just really cool when we find more information on this. This is brand new information.
Hey, John.
Yep.
And all the peoples in their surrounding area all sacrificed unclean animals. So when you find an absence of that, it is a strong marker to the Israelites, right?
Yeah, it's not that they sacrificed, they ate them too.
Right.
This is going to be a big thing for finding out who lived there. Kosher versus non-kosher. Were there pigs there, basically? They probably ate other animals as well, but pigs were the big one. So this is going to be a big way of telling the Israelites apart from other peoples of Canaan. And another interesting thing is something called the footprints of God. These are 400-meter long little campsites. I say little. Relatively large campsites. These are in the Jordan Valley that has a small earthwork and wall around it, and a campsite with an altar. Now it has a smaller campsite and a larger campsite, so kind of a segregation there. And these shapes were intentional. These are not due to the land, to the topography. They made this in this way intentionally. Now, we don't have anything that connects this to Israel except that it matches Joshua's travel perfectly from the Jordan Valley to Ebal and everywhere in between. So this is just one interesting thing that if you want some more information, you can definitely dig into it. There's not a lot that connects to Israel, but it is a strong overlap as far as the journey. Now, what did Joshua do after Ai and Ebal? Well, he was tricked by the Gibeonites, and the other people of Canaan didn't like that, so they then attacked the Gibeonites, which made Joshua attack them. And so you had a southern coalition. These cities here come and attack, and then Joshua then made a major campaign through all these cities. Gilgal, Makkedah, Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, and Debir. And so after this campaign, the southern campaign, Joshua has conquered the hill country, the Negev, which is the southern portion of Canaan area here. Now Goshen, we don't really know what that is. We don't know if that is just a city in Israel named after the land in Egypt, because it's probably not the land in Egypt where they were staying. And then Gibeon. And then they returned up here to Gilgal, their base of operations, it seems. And I do want to mention Lachish here. Lachish is a place called Tel El Duer today. Now, we have evidence of people living here 1480, 1400 BC. Now, this was not a place that was destroyed by Israel, but it does have one very interesting thing in it. We have evidence of people breaking down a wall. We have a bow in the wall where likely somebody broke in, and an ostracon was found. Now, an ostracon is a pottery sherd. It's a sherd, not a shard. That's the technical term for that. but a broken piece of pottery with writing on it. That's what an ostracon is. Basically, since they didn't have papyrus or paper or anything like that to spare, that was a rather rich commodity, they would use pottery as their blank pieces of paper. So if you had to send a message to somebody real quickly, you just take a broken piece of pottery and write on it and give it to them, and they'd go. In this place, we have found this ostracon. It is part of a milk bowl that was broken, and on it said, "Servant in charge of the honey." So in one of the first cities that Israel came in and conquered, that didn't destroy, you have a milk bowl with honey written on it, which just brings up Joshua 5:6. He who is has promised to their fathers to give us a land flowing with milk and honey. And I just find that so interesting. Just neat that we have here so much honey that you have to put a servant in charge of it all. I mean, I get honey every year for the last several years. I don't get that much honey. That's a lot of honey. And it's on a milk bowl. So I just found that interesting. You can probably dig a little bit more into Lachish, but that is the one thing that really connects it with the biblical account. I'm sure there's much other, but we won't get into those details. The next city of mention is Hazor, or Hazor, however you want to pronounce that. Now, for a while, there was no military campaigns, at least not in the center. For some reason, Israel seems to have come in, and after Jericho and Ai and the southern campaign, there's not really much going on in the center here. They seem to have a good foothold. Now, after the southern campaign, Jabin, the king of Hazor, hears about all this, hears about all of the bad stuff going on from his point of view, and he decides to do something about it. So he gets a group together and tries to attack Joshua. So Joshua then goes up north and attacks Hazor. Now, Hazor is very interesting because not only did we find one destruction layer. There? Okay. Thought it went out for a second. And so one dates to about the time of Joshua. The other seems to date to about the time of Deborah and Barak. Now that's interesting because the Bible doesn't say that Deborah and Barak destroyed the city, just that they killed the king. Now, Hazor is a city that has 200 some acres, so it's relatively large. Jerusalem is the only one that's bigger in this area. One is at the 15th century, Joshua's time, and the 13th century. Now, some will try to argue that this is Pharaoh Merneptah. Remember that name, that will come up a little bit later. But some will try to argue that this is Deborah and Barak. Now, it does mean one more thing, that people came in and rebuilt between Joshua and the second destruction in the 13th century. So that one, no one can contest. But who destroyed the second time? Who destroyed Hazor the second time in the 13th century? Well, one interesting thing that they did in the 13th century, they destroyed all the idols especially. And they didn't just destroy them in process of destroying the city. They really destroyed them. They targeted them. You can see here, somebody hit this guy in the face, destroying him, as well as a number of other idols. Doesn't make sense for Egyptians to do this. Makes perfect sense for the Israelites to do this. So it's more likely that this is Deborah and Barak's work, despite the Bible not being explicit in its destruction. But it makes sense that if they defeated the king, they would have destroyed the city. Now, again, it is a huge city, so we do not have all the information. In fact, it would take 600 years to fully excavate this. But it would have been a very rich city, and you can see here how large it is. You have the upper city and the lower city. And they have identified a number of places in the city. But it was described as a fierce conflagration marked the end of the Canaanite Hazor across the site. A thick layer of ashes and charred wood in places 3 feet deep attest to the intensity of the blaze in the northern Galilee city. And here you can see one of the occultic centers that was destroyed in Joshua's time. And here is a layer of ash. So a very large layer of ash. Now after this, we see a period of nobody living here. And then people came in, they rebuilt, and then another destruction layer. And it makes sense that Israel, backsliding as they had throughout the entire Judges period, would have lost some ground and people would come back in, so Deborah and Barak then go and regain that ground. So this is very interesting as far as giving us maybe a little bit more data than what the Bible explicitly tells us. But what about from the Canaanites' point of view? We have Joshua and the Judges written from the Israelite point of view. What were the people of Canaan thinking? And this is where something called the Amarna letters come in. So after their initial attack, you have all these city-states writing for help. Basically, these are not Chex Mixes. These are cuneiform stones, clay tablets, that they wrote on, basically linear arrows. And they're all saying, help me, help me, help me. They were crying to Egypt for support. Now, if you remember from a few lessons ago, Tutmosis III, the Napoleon of ancient Egypt, the New Kingdom, he went out and he conquered all of Canaan. So all these cities paid them taxes, paid them tribute, paid them allegiance, and as such, Egypt was in charge of their protection. Kind of like a mafia hitman, you pay for your protection money. That's basically like that. So they were writing to Egypt saying, hey, where's our protection you promised us? Because we got these Habiru coming in. Now, the word Habiru can be used to mean nomads or marauders. But it's very interesting that it also can be translated as Hebrew. Now, most people translate it as Habiru. But there is a movement, as we find more uses of this, trying to connect that to Hebrew. Because we just have HBR used. We don't have the vowels written out. And if you remember, the term Hebrew does not mean the Israelites alone. That term comes from descendants of Eber. If you go back to Genesis 11, I believe, has those genealogies. Eber is the descendant or his descendants are named the Hebrew. Just like the Israel's descendants are named the Israelites. Now, these would have been written in these decades, plus or minus a decade or two. So these were found, there's 382 tablets that were found, and they were discovered accidentally. A woman was digging up fertilizer and found some of these clay tablets. Others were gathered from the antiquities market and such for a few decades until they found all of them. And there might be more, but those are the ones we found. They were written to two pharaohs, Amenhotep III and Amenhotep IV. Now remember, Amenhotep III was the one that built that temple that mentioned the nomads, marauders of Yahweh at the time of Joshua. And Amenhotep IV, fun fact about him is he changed his name to Akhenaten and tried to get Egypt to worship a single god. It's very interesting that just a generation or two after Moses destroys it, basically, at the insistence of God, that they start trying to worship a single God. I won't say any more on that, but that's just interesting to me. And so we have them writing to Egypt about this time period, and we don't really have any evidence of Egypt responding. Now, all these are in Egypt's storerooms, or at least a good portion of them, I believe. So Egypt received these letters, but they didn't respond to them, at least not that we know. And we have found these letters as well in Canaan. So just like today, when you send an email, you have a copy of that email in your sent folder. You keep a copy of everything you send out, so you have full record. Now, some of what these people were saying, this is the king of Gezer, he pleads saying, save his land from the power of the Habiru, Pharaoh. He's talking to Pharaoh. So save Pharaoh's land from the power of the Habiru. The war is severe. The Habiru are stronger than we. The king admits that his own brother has pledged himself to the Habiru. And so they're pleading, all the lands of the king, my lord, have deserted. Lost are the lands of the king. The Habiru have plundered all the lands of the king. This is from Jerusalem. And they're even pointing fingers at each other. Now he, Azru, the leader of the kingdom of Amaru, is like the Habiru, a stray dog. But he doesn't respond. We have copies that we found in Jerusalem, or at least fragments of copies, but nothing that Pharaoh responds back. And that makes sense. Remember, Egypt was severely hurt by the Exodus. You have all their population removed, a good portion of their army destroyed. That would have made them very weak, meaning that they got a lot more problems at home probably at this time period than dealing with some vassal states that can't handle a few marauders. But based upon the Amarna letters, we see people up here being attacked, the Habiru coming in, and just basically coming in and spreading everywhere, which matches very well with what we see in the biblical account, coming in and spreading everywhere.
Where's the data from on the left from?
That's the Amarna letters. So that's what we get extra biblically. Extra biblically on the left for those at home, biblically on the right. And so there is a strong overlap. And we have no letters from those cities that Joshua destroyed first. That is another strong overlap. So it's interesting that we can see both sides in this point. We have the Israel account in the Bible, as well as the Canaanite account in these Amarna letters. And that leads us to the Judges period. Now this period, like I said before, is a very wide, long period, and there's not a lot of details. But we do have some things, some broad brushstrokes that we can match. One, we have this Berlin pedestal, listing the victories of a pharaoh in the 14th century, the 1300s BC. Now it mentions Ashkelon. This was before the Philistines had fully colonized this land at this time, as well as, I forget what the other one was, Canaan there, all right. But the last string here, in the bottom right, you can see what it would look like fully there, is Israel. Now it is partially destroyed, but you can see on the top, there's not really much left to the imagination just by continuing those letters, those hieroglyphics there. Now even secular scientists will say this is Israel. In 2001, that's when they promoted that. And so this would be the oldest mention of Israel as a nation. We also have the Merneptah stele, or stela. This, the pharaoh I mentioned before, that they tried to say Deborah and Barak's work was his, because he did raid in the Levant area. This is a 10-foot tall monument that he put up after he came in and attacked some places. This is basically them coming in, beating some people, and then putting up a big sign saying, "Nanny, nanny, boo-boo, I beat you." It says, "Canaan is plundered, Gezer is captured. Ashkelon is carried off. Yanoam is made into non-existence. Israel is wasted, its seed is not. Huru has become a widow because of Egypt." Now, most likely these are exaggerations because Israel, obviously, the seed was not wasted. And so, just like I said before, Egyptians were master propagandists. But it is a mention of Israel, meaning that they were here at the time the Bible says. We also have this inscription here that says Jerubbaal from the 12th, 11th century. And we have a judge nicknamed Jerubbaal, Gideon. And this name is a very unique name. You don't expect to find this name willy-nilly. And the fact that we have a pottery sherd, an ostracon, with his name on it means that we are in the correct time period. Now this may be Gideon, but we can't say that. It could be, we can't say it for sure. So we need to be very careful again about matching this name to this person. It is the same, and that's fine enough for us. We have matched the time period, matched the Bible as far as that goes. If we had more information connected to this as far as what this person did, then maybe we could say that. But it shows the Bible was accurate about the names of the time period and the time period itself. But one place that we spend a lot of time, or at least the Israelites spend a lot of time, is Shiloh. So this is about 20 miles north of Jerusalem, and they arrived here about 1400, so one of the first places they arrived. And this was where the ark would have been, the tabernacle. And they would have worshipped here for about 300 years. We know that the tabernacle was there because the ark was there, and the ark would have been with the tabernacle. So in these layers, we see that the Israelites came in and established their point of worship. For one, the bones. We go from a 4% pig bone to a 1% pig bone. Now, why is a 1% pig bone not too surprising for a place that the Israelites were living in? Yeah, it may be a little bit surprising if it was just them, because it is unclean, but were the Israelites the only ones staying there? No, the Gibeonites. Remember, when they made their deal with Israel, they tricked them. Their punishment was to serve the Levites with the tabernacle. They would have been, in Joshua 9, 26 and 27, the woodcutters and the water carriers. So that 1% pig bone was probably from them. But what's even more interesting is that mainly we have the right side of the animal. So animal bones, you can tell which side is which, and the right side of the animal would have been the priestly portion. Now, they've been digging here for a while, for at least a few years. So they can still need some more help, still more digging that needs to be done. And if you really want to, you can join these people. The people digging here are the group associated with the Associates for Biblical Research, and they do take volunteers. So if you want to spend a summer digging in Canaan, by all means, if you have that time, that just sounds wonderful. But they found a few other things as well. We have some scarabs, 3 from the Hyksos period, 1 from Tutmosis III. You can see a picture of that. Now the Hyksos, I want to say and make a note that they didn't have their names on it. They used symbols. They used the coat of arms, while the Egyptians of the New Kingdom especially used their names. But we also have a pomegranate. This is a ceramic pomegranate that's about 20 centimeters. This was a symbol used in the tabernacle as well as the temple. It had 4 of the 5 prongs on the bottom, and they think they found another half of one. Excuse me. But this is a very interesting finding, as well as some potential places for the tabernacle itself. Unfortunately, there are a few different places. So that's either good or bad because we don't have just one place to choose from, but at the same time, we don't have one place to choose from. So we have the northern point that has some potholes that look like they would have supported poles, and it fits the biblical dimensions. We have the summit here that later did have a church built on it. A Byzantine building was built there, and they came in and they tried to build churches where there was some history of Jesus and thus Israel. And then the southern approach, which does have a few more churches as well. But one thing could be done that fits all of them is that it could have been immobile, based upon the season, time of year even. So they could have moved from here to here to here, and then all through it, allowing the area to air out, or just based upon the festival season, something like that. But it is kind of interesting that we have 3 sites, and it matches very well with what Israel would have been doing at this time. Now, after a while, the ark was sent to Ebenezer and was captured by the Philistines. Now, Ebenezer was destroyed about 1050 BC. That would have been 1 Samuel 4, 1 and 2. A runner was then sent to Shiloh, about 26.2 miles away, so about a marathon, and told Eli, and Eli died, the high priest. And in Shiloh, we have a destruction layer that fits to about this time. You can see here. This is very interesting because the Bible really doesn't say much about Shiloh after this point. We do have a passage in Psalm 78. He forsook his dwelling at Shiloh, the tent where he dwelt among mankind, and delivered his power to captivity, his glory to the hand of his foe. Now that sounds like the ark being taken. But it also says, he gave his people over to the sword and vented his wrath on his heritage. Fire devoured their young men, and their young women had no marriage song. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. This seems to be describing, potentially, this destruction of Shiloh. So it could be that the Philistines, after fighting at Ebenezer, followed some people and destroyed Shiloh as well. Now, there is more digging that we can do. But the Bible is lack on details as far as what happened to Shiloh. So perhaps we can find some more information, and perhaps this is mentioning its destruction, the destruction of Shiloh. But as far as the Philistines go, we had a little bit more information on them. So they came in after Israel made it to Canaan, because they weren't listed as the number of people or part of the people that need to be kicked out. And that's what we find extra-biblically. The Philistines are related or connected with the Sea Peoples. The Sea Peoples is how they were called in a lot of extra-biblical accounts. You can see here a picture of the Egyptians fighting them off. This would have been either right before, right after, or during the time that they settled in Canaan. Now, we know where they came from extra-biblically because of their DNA. And you can see the 5 main cities that they would have settled in and some graveyards there, and we can connect them to Crete and Greece. Biblically, we can also do the same thing. For one, their contest of champions, David and Goliath, that's very Greek. That is Greek culture right there. This would have been about the time that Troy was destroyed. And we have that at the same period within the Greek culture. We also have Jeremiah in 47:4 saying that they came from the coast of Kaftor. That is the ancient name for Crete. So the Bible is accurate, and we're catching up scientifically with where the Philistines came from. Now, we also know that they came from Greece because they have a very similar style of pottery, but they came in and they took the coastal lane, and Israel took the mountainous area. And as far as Samson, I can't go through the Philistines without mentioning Samson, but he was the one that the judge that came in and ended on a somewhat of a high note and killing more people than he did the rest of the time. He did this by destroying 2 pillars in a temple. Now, for a long time, the Bible is criticized because no way would a people be able to, if not just choose to, build a temple that would be supported on only 2 pillars in the center. And then we found a number of temples that do just this. Again, another time that they try to argue from a point of silence that later the Bible is proved correct. We also have an ostracon that has the name Goliath on it, found at Gath. A little bit after the time of Goliath, but not by much. So probably not the Goliath of David and Goliath, but it again shows the correct time period for this name. It also shows that the Philistines had the Semitic writing system by this time. Now, what do we know from this time period archaeologically about the people of Israel, besides Shiloh? The last thing I want to mention tonight is Dan. Dan was a long-lived city. We have Abraham coming to Dan sometime before it was named Dan. And it existed for about 2,400 years and then abandoned. And they've been digging there for about 45 years total since 1960s off and on. Previously, it was named Laish, or Leshim, and it's at the northern part of Canaan. You can see a close-up of it there. Well, we know from archaeological remains that it was a rich city based upon the large amount of Mycenaean pottery. This is pottery imported from Greece. Very nice pottery you can see there. And we can see that it was very pagan religious. They had a lot of pagan idols there. This is the dancer from Dan. And so we see a lot of this in this area. Now, suddenly, in the Judges period, all this is gone. We see a destruction layer, and then we see a very sudden culture shift. We now have semi-nomadic people, and we know this because of the pottery they used. You can see the bottoms of these potteries, they're round. They would not stand up. So what people do, when they lived in tents, they would dig a little hole, put their pottery there so that it would stand up. Because when you're moving around, a flat bottom piece of pottery isn't the best thing because flat ground ain't that easy. We also see that we don't have that many more, or that any religious items or artifacts being found in this area. So a complete change as far as religion goes. All of this is very consistent with Israel coming in. And then suddenly we see things start to change again. We start to see deities from northern Syria come in. We see standing stones on the outer gate, a 4-horned altar, a very large 4-horned altar that would have been used for things like cattle and larger animals, some incense shovels, and olive oil presses. Basically, all the things needed for pagan occultic practices. And this matches with what we see in the Bible, because Dan was one of the first and longest lasting forms of rebellion against God. And unfortunately, it came partly due to Jonathan, the grandson of Moses. No relation as far as me, Jonathan. He gives Jonathan's a bad name. But still, we have Jewish-style pottery, meaning this was still Israel here. But we have some massive amounts of backsliding. And so all these occur during the Judges period. All this matches very well. And while we don't have a lot of intricate details from the Bible, all the broad brushstrokes that the Bible gives us do match. And archaeologically, we're seeing that not only does it match, we're getting maybe a little bit more information that would explain what was going on during this period that the Bible doesn't tell us much about. And that's basically the summary there. So as far as resources, not a lot about this, but there are some here, mainly for Jericho. But for a lot of the other stuff, you're basically going to have to go to some of the archaeological sites, some here, but also some mentioned previously, to get just basically a page here, a page there about some of these specifics. Are there any questions tonight about, go ahead.
Some of those different periods that they showed
Mhm. Sure. So how do we know which period? So basically in a tell, that is the mound that cities were built on most of the time, we start from the most recent, the top layer, and dig our way down. We can identify the time of the layer based upon the items in there. So by the people's junk, by the things they left behind. So like when you move out of the house, you have all the things hidden in the cracks, all the garbage maybe you've dropped outside. We dig that up archaeologically, they dig that up archaeologically, and they can date it that way. Now, the reason why we have different layers is because whenever people would remodel, they would tear things down near to the foundation and fill that in with dirt. And so we know that when this layer was being built, the layer underneath it would have been the freshest layer. And they would have done that intentionally to build on top of it. So by the layer just underneath the building, they can date that building, or at least get a pretty good idea of when that building was built. And by the layer on top of it, they can tell when that building was no more. So that gives them a window on dating that building. And the longer people lived in a place, the higher the layers would be, because they would tear down a building, leave a remain, fill that in, make another building, tear that down, leave a remain, fill that in, build another building, and so on. So the longer people lived in a place, the taller the mound would be, and the more that they can dig out. Does that answer your question?
So it would be maybe a couple feet.
Try a couple dozen.
Maybe for a modern activity, right now we're building a greenhouse at Purdue, and we recently, right behind the building wall, and we excavated down and we're putting a footing in for the new greenhouse. And 18 feet below grade, we found the cistern for an aviary. So it can be pretty deep.
Oh, cool. A modern example of, I guess, recent archaeology. All right, cool. Any other questions? All right. Well, next time we're going to be getting into the kingdom period, David, Solomon, Saul, all that. And it's going to be some pretty cool stuff. For now, though, thank you.